Michael Roderick, what's up, my friend? So good to have you on the Human to Human podcast. How are you today?
Thanks so much for having me, Karan. I'm really excited to be here.
I see a stack of books behind you. Is there something you're
Yes.
reading recently? Is there a book that stands out?
There's tons back there. I'm probably in the middle of at least like four or five different different books right now. Yeah, you'll see there's a lot of Seth Godin stuff back there, and a number of different authors that I'm a fan of. So,
Dude, that's incredible. By
thanks.
the way, man, you're one of the nicest people I've ever met.
Oh, that's very kind. Thank you.
We met in New York last year. No, this year. It was
Yes.
this year, back in January when I was there for a couple of weeks, and we met
Yep.
up in New York, and we had this amazing coffee meeting in this hotel that you're like, hey, I know the city, come meet me at this hotel. And the rest was history. And we had an epic conversation. And one thing I realized about you then, prior to not knowing you at all, is that relationships mean a lot to you.
Yes.
And I'd love to start this episode by asking you a little bit about you and your story and why relationships are really at the forefront of what you do.
Sure. So my background is I started out as a high school English teacher, and I went from being a high school English teacher to a Broadway producer in under 2 years. And a lot of people were very curious as to sort of how I had moved so quickly, how I had gotten to know so many people. So I decided to actually study networking. So I started hosting workshops where I would simulate one-on-one meetings, job interviews, and cocktail parties. And based on what I saw, I noticed there were a lot of patterns. And then based on those patterns, I started to develop frameworks for basically understanding more about like how do we develop relationships, how do we build relationships, how do we make sure that those relationships are effective. And I've just spent a lot of time within that particular space thinking about, why do we say yes to people? Why do certain people sort of stay part of our circles? Why do people kind of drift away? How do we keep relationships going? It's always just been a topic of fascination for me.
Why relationships? Was there something deeper, something maybe as a kid or?
Yeah, I think that, I was never necessarily the popular kid, right? In school, I was always, I was the theater person, I was the creative person. So I sort of always had my like small group of friends, but I definitely would have lots of instances where I was sort of not part of the crowd, right? Like not part of the group. And I think that what has always kind of driven me is this aspect of like, if you are able to cultivate and develop relationships, then you're never alone. And I know what it's like to feel alone. I know how hard that can be. I know how hard it can be to sort of not feel connected to a particular group. So a lot of the work that I ended up doing was really starting to study like, what is it that we can do to make sure that we are building our own relationships so that we're not in that place of feeling alone, so that we are able to achieve the goals that we want to achieve, and that we have people around us who will help us, help support us as we move those projects forward.
Absolutely. I think many people now are even feeling more isolated just from quarantine, being stuck at home. Have you found a way to being somebody, actually, would you consider yourself an introvert or an extrovert or a hybrid?
I feel like I'm a hybrid because I have a lot of sort of extroverted tendencies. Like I do like hosting, I do like being around crowds, I do like talking, like I get energy from people. But on that same note, I can't do it all the time. Like I definitely need that like recharge time. And I spend a good amount of time, with myself as well, right? Like I spend a good amount of time writing. I spend a good amount of time, thinking, mapping out ideas, and a lot of that is not social. So I feel like I kind of ride the line. I'm kind of like in the middle somewhere, I guess.
Got it. I would say I'm the same way. I host a ton of events now, virtual, and I'm on when I'm on. But man, am I off when I'm off. I'm super disconnected. I just want the world to myself. And oftentimes, I don't know if you feel this way or not, but I find the types of conversations that we have, and I would consider you to go deep with people just as much as I do. I find after a night of really intense, meaningful, deep conversations, it's almost like therapy, right? And I feel like I'm like, I need some downtime after that. Like I generally stick to myself for the next couple hours, sometimes next couple of days, because I feel like I'm wearing the weight and the problems and the struggles of everybody that I have met. Do you find something similar happens to you?
Yeah. I mean, I think there's this idea that if you've been through anything difficult in your own life, that it sort of increases the level of empathy that you have. They often say that some of the best copywriters are people who have had like really difficult lives or difficult childhoods, because basically like all of that pain and all of that frustration, they're able to kind of get into the heads of other people, right? And sort of see like where that pain comes from. So I think that, if you are a naturally empathetic person, right? Like if you really connect with somebody, you really truly listen to them, which let's face it, like a lot of the time people are not listening, right? They're not fully taking in what somebody else is saying. They're thinking about whatever they want to do next, or they're thinking about what happened before. It's hard. It takes effort to remain present in a conversation. But if you do remain present, then you are likely going to experience the emotion that other person is experiencing. So if they're in a really, really intense space and you're also helping them through it, walking them through it, you're sort of absorbing all of that, right? Like you're taking all of that on yourself as well. And there's probably stuff happening in your subconscious that you don't even know about, right? So you get to the end of a conversation that's really deep or really, intense like that, and you may get home and just be like, man, I feel like I ran a marathon. And, you don't understand why you're tired, but it's because you're mentally exhausted. Your brain has been working really, really hard to not only sort of process all the emotion in the moment, but subconsciously process all the questions that conversation probably brought up for you about yourself and your own identity and sort of where you're going to go next and all those different types of things.
Yeah, absolutely. You almost take on this role of being a teammate, a brother, a best friend, all wrapped up into the same type of conversation. So
Exactly.
Michael, when I think about the word relationships and when I think about people that are well connected or super connected, man, you're right there. Like you're right up there, because when we had coffee back in January and we were riffing off ideas and names of people who in our networks, and I realized that you already knew everybody. You knew virtually everyone that I was talking to you about. And I was like, I'm this guy from East Coast Canada, now in Toronto. And you're like, oh, Toronto, do you know so-and-so? I was like, oh, holy shit, this guy is super connected. How did you, and then high school teacher to Broadway producer, like how did you get so connected with people?
Yeah. I mean, ultimately what it comes down to is it comes down to really paying attention to people, right? And sort of getting an understanding of what is it that they're interested in? What is it that they're excited by? What is it that they want to do next? And taking the time in your conversations to figure out sort of how are you going to be part of that person's story. So a lot of the time what I like to say is that we love to feel useful. We hate to feel used. So if you can basically figure out where somebody's challenges are, what they're dealing with, and you're able to sort of jump in and say, oh, I can introduce you, or I could help you here, or I know somebody, etc. It really kind of changes the dynamic of that conversation, because a lot of the time we're kind of in our own heads, right? Like we're, I call it asking blinders, where it's like we know what we want, we know what we're looking for, so we just kind of like barrel through, right? Yeah. And try to get that thing. And it's rare that people will like genuinely ask you about yourself and what you're trying to do and what you're trying to accomplish. And it's even rarer that they actually do something about it. And I've often said, like, there's basically two rules to blowing people's minds. Like, absolutely just like blowing their minds and having them just remember you always. And they're two very, very simple rules. And the first is you do what you say you're going to do. And the second is you do it promptly. That is it. The number of people who sort of make promises or say that they're going to do things and then either never do them or do them so late is staggering. So if you're the person who actually follows through on the commitments that you make, and you take the time to be proactive and sort of make those commitments, what happens is people remember you as a result of that. So for me, a lot of the time, what would happen is I would meet somebody, they would tell me a little bit about what they were trying to accomplish, and I would think through kind of who did I know that might be able to help them, or what resources did I know of, what opportunities were there, and then I would just figure out sort of what I could do to help, and then I would do that as quickly as I could, right? So like I would follow up in a very timely manner. So what happened was I would build this credibility, and then I became the type of person that other people wanted to introduce to their friends, right? And ultimately, that's what, like, if you're trying to build really strong relationships, that's what you want. You want people to basically be honored to introduce you to somebody else. You want them to have this thought of like, if I introduce this person to this other person, I know that they're going to have a great experience because this person's helped me so much, right? So what happened was I ended up just getting all of these intros, and the more of those people that I would meet, the larger sort of the network grew, right? The bigger the circle. So then it was just a matter of getting a lot of those people together at various points. And in many cases, I could sort of step back and no longer be a part of it. I remember my very first like real mixer per se, right? And it was when I was working in the theater world. It was before I had started any Broadway producing. I was still doing theater on sort of the smaller levels. But one of the things that was happening all the time was that we would host these bar parties. And the idea was like you would get a bunch of people to donate to your show, and then they would come to a bar and drink. But the problem was everybody was doing a bar party. So it kind of got to this place of like, do I go to so-and-so's bar party or do I go to this person's bar party? And there wasn't much of a driver anymore. So I realized that there were tons of actors, writers, directors, producers who hadn't met 90% of the theater companies that I knew. So what I did was I would host a fundraiser where I said, come donate 5, 10, 15 bucks, whatever. We'll have drink specials. And in the back room, there's going to be 15 different theater companies all sitting at tables for you to meet and get to know and develop relationships with. And that, all those people got to know each other. And then what happened? They would talk about me. And, I was always doing that. I was, whether it was the conference, I created a conference called ConnectorCon. I ran that for a number of years. And it's like those events that I hosted, right? People would talk about me when I wasn't in the room because I was the one who sort of brought them all together. But I brought them all together because I knew what they all needed, and I had already kind of vetted those people. So I was never really worried about sort of like who was in the room because I had already met them and decided that they were really solid people who were going to help each other.
Man, that is such a valuable lesson. And you're absolutely right. There's been 2 people this week who have very quickly made introductions after our initial phone calls. And I wake up the next day with email introductions already made in my inbox. And in my head, I'm like, oh my God, I love these 2 people. Yep. Look how quickly they just acted. And man, you're so right. It's one thing to actually do what you say you're going to do and how many people don't. And then, and how many times does that task get left and forgotten about?
Yeah, what I like to say about this is that you have to choose which over you want in your life, and it's either overextended or over delivering. You can't have both. So you're either making lots of promises and you're falling behind because you're overextended, you've just made too many promises, or you've really consciously understood how much time you really logistically have, and you are over delivering on the people that you've met with, right? So you could meet 50 people and make a bunch of promises and hope that you're going to get through the 50 introductions that you offered to make this week. Or you could meet 10 people and really, really make sure that you are following through on all of those, on all of those different types of things. And if you over deliver, you're going to be much, much easier to remember, because overextended is everywhere. I could throw a rock and I'm going to hit somebody who's overextended, right? But people who over deliver, people who really take the time to sort of figure out what you need, come through in a timely manner, it's so rare. And you know, when you do that, it just like it completely changes the perception. It completely changes the game.
I've got two follow-up questions on that. The first is, how do you keep track of all of these relationships? You know, people in New York, Toronto, all over the US, and I mean, all over the world, I'm sure. And then the second thing, actually answer that one while I remember my second question.
Yeah, no worries. So I literally use a spreadsheet. So I have a Google spreadsheet, and I have a series of columns for that spreadsheet. So I have like names, I have location, I have a column specifically for like my intro blurb, like whatever I've written to make intros for them. I have a column for what they need. I have a column for whatever they've told me they're looking for, whatever they could, you know, they could use help with. And I have a column for like personal details. So I have a column for all sorts of random things that pop up. And the thing about a spreadsheet is that you can filter it and you can search a spreadsheet. So what you can do is, let's say you are asking me about really great people in Toronto, right? I can go to that column that is just the location that everybody's in. I can filter that just for Toronto and at a glance see everybody that I know in Toronto. So it's like, it's all right there, right? Or let's just say, for example, you really love craft beer, right? I could just do a search on that entire spreadsheet for craft beer. And in all of those like mini columns, anybody who mentioned craft beer is going to pop up. So it basically creates like an external brain, right? Where I can sort of house all of these, all of this information that I have from these notepads, where like I've sat down and you know, you write down your notes about the individual, but then you upload it into a spreadsheet and you have it there. And now you have those notes, and you can always go back to those notes, and you can always sort of check and see like how long has it been since I've chatted with these people, and you really figure out kind of where things are. But it's an amazing database for me, because anytime somebody says like I could use help with this, or I'm looking to talk to somebody who's done this, I don't have to just search my memory only for like who that person is or where they could connect. I can go directly to that spreadsheet and say, okay, let me search these terms, and then I can find whoever those people are and what they're looking for.
When you make a promise to make an intro, make a connection, get back to somebody, I can see how it would be overwhelming and how you could overpromise. Do you have a system where you time batch, or every day or once a week you're able to actually follow through? Because I think about the number of conversations I'm having in the run of a week, and I am making promises, and I'm sure that I'm dropping some of those. I'm sure I'm forgetting some of those. And I don't necessarily have a system where I batch deliver. So I'm just curious if there's something that you've worked with or tested.
Yeah, so a lot of the time what I find works really well is to either set a time of day that is specifically geared towards your follow-ups, where it's either like end of the day, you've got like an hour, and that hour is just for the follow-ups of the day, or early in the morning, you've got a batch of follow-ups and you're going to do your follow-ups. Another thing that I've worked with and that I've had success with has been the aspect of you plan the meeting and then you block out 30 to 45 minutes after the meeting's over before you are going to start another meeting. And there's that, you know, and for some people, they kind of use that as downtime. But in the past, what I've done, which has worked really well, is I've used that as my follow-up time. So I finish the call, and then it's like, get that email out, you know, and I double opt in everything. So, you know, I'm asking the other person about the intro. So it's not like I'm making an intro at that moment, right? I'm asking, and I'm sort of reaching out. And that's the other piece of it. If you make sure that people know that you are going to be reaching out to the other person, then the timeline is going to be whatever the timeline's going to be, right? So like if that person doesn't respond to you, you can't make the intro yet. You have to wait, you know? But let's say you know that it's been like a week or two and that person hasn't responded to you, then you can go back to the person and say, listen, I haven't heard back from them yet. I'm planning on following up and sort of checking in, but just so you know, I haven't heard back from them yet. And in some cases, they get back to you right away. People will get back to you like that day or, 2 days later or whatever it is. And then you just jump on it and you get the intro done. But if you block out that like chunk of time after meetings, then you can do your follow-up during those, during that block of time. And the last thing I'll say that's really important is that we're all human, which means we're all going to have times where things get backed up, right? And if that does happen, that's a wonderful opportunity for you to stop and say, why did I get overwhelmed? What caused this? Because there's a good chance that there was something that happened on the scheduling side that didn't quite work for you. There's a good chance that maybe you realized, you offered 10 or 15 introductions as opposed to like 3 or 4 because you just got really, really excited, and that reflection on your process can be a really, really good thing. It can really change things. And one other thing about sort of lots of intros, right? Sometimes people have this thought that, if I know you and I'm excited to introduce you to people, me coming up with 10 or 15 or like a large number of people to introduce you to is a really good thing. Mm-hmm. But the thing you have to remember is that on the other side, somebody has to then field all of those emails. So I know that I personally wouldn't want to go to my inbox, even if somebody made an offer to make, 15 different introductions and then suddenly have 15 emails in my inbox of people that I have to respond to and sort of, take care of. So if your numbers are sort of stacking up, like you're meeting somebody, you're having a good conversation and you have a lot of ideas, maybe try to come up with like the top 2 or 3 as opposed to just trying to get them all out at once. Because the other really big piece of this is that, remember, your intros are a great way for you to curate, right? So let's say you introduce 2 people, right? And this person meets those 2 people and you circle back with those 2 people and they say, wow, that was really awkward. They spent the entire call trying to sell me, and you're like, oh my God, I had no idea. They were not like that, right? It's much easier to do damage control on those 2 relationships than if you had made 15 introductions off of that first conversation.
Well said, man. I've been privy to conversations where I've made introductions and I get a follow-up a couple of weeks later. Hey, did you know that so-and-so tried to pitch me? And I was like, oh my God, I had no idea. And luckily for me, I had only introduced maybe 1 person or sometimes 2 and not the 15. So I totally hear what you're saying. And, earlier you said people love to feel useful, but they hate to feel used. And I just want to reiterate that. I think that's so powerful. And I know that there's something around the relationship between giving and debt that you often speak about. Could you elaborate on that?
Sure. So basically, whenever we give, there is this good feeling that we get. So as a result, a lot of the time we just keep kind of giving. But there are people in our lives who they have what I like to refer to as a very strong reciprocity impulse, right? Like they really feel like they need to give back, right? They receive and they're kind of like, it feels like a hot potato and I've got to give back. Now the problem is sometimes we think we're being magnanimous. We think we're being lovely. And we're like, don't worry about it. Don't worry about it. Don't worry about it. But the problem is for somebody who has a very, very high reciprocity impulse, they start to basically look at that giving as debt. We've never told them like, hey, you need to pay me back. But in their brain, they're thinking, I need to pay you back, right? It's like, it's just part of the thing. So it eventually reaches this point where it starts to feel like credit card debt, right? Where it's like, okay, this person just made an intro. They just got me a job. They just found, they just sent me a client and now I've made all of this money. And it starts to feel like the credit card company is calling you. So what do? You start to ignore it, right? So I have seen people where they've actually ruined their relationships because they gave and gave and gave and never let the other person know what it was that they needed. And that person started to avoid them because they were like, I can't get anything else from you. You're making me feel awkward.
And it's so interesting because if you never voice it, nor do you display any sort of expectation, nor do you even, oftentimes I find two people could be looking at the exact same relationship and have two very different perspectives on who owes you, or, hey, you got here because of me, or I connected you with so-and-so, and you have no way of knowing sometimes. And then those relationships will catch you off guard.
Yeah. And I often will tell people, like, sometimes you meet people who, like, they've been givers their whole life. They've really helped people, and they'll be burnt out, and they'll be upset, and they'll say, oh, you know what? I've done so much for this person and I've never gotten anything in return. And I always have to say, listen, like, I'm really sorry that you feel that way, but if you felt like you should be getting something in return, then that was a transaction. That wasn't a gift. When you give a gift, it is without expectation of return. So if you are disappointed at the end of your giving that something didn't come back to you from that person, then you just engaged them in a transaction, and you didn't tell them that you engaged them in a transaction. If you're giving, you're just giving. You're just helping. You're just supporting somebody. You're just doing something for them. And you're going to let them know what it is that you need, but they are under no obligation to do anything for you. And this is the problem. Like, most of the education that is around relationship building, networking, anything within that space lives in that, this world of, like, worshiping reciprocity, thinking that everything gets solved as a result of reciprocity. And whether that be reciprocity from the individual or the most famous one of, like, the universe, right? like it'll come back, it'll work, it'll work out. The universe is on its own timeline. So you've got to let people know what it is that you need. I've often told artists, and I've often told a lot of entrepreneurs this: it doesn't matter if you're in the trenches if nobody knows you down there. So you can do the best work in the world, but if you're not letting people know what it is that you need, if you're not communicating the things that you need, if you're not asking, then you can't be upset when people are like, they didn't help you, they didn't support you, because most of the time they didn't know that you needed support. And that actually ties to another point, is that a lot of the time, if you're always giving and you're always helping and you're never asking for things, people will start to assume that you are all set. Because how is it possible that you could be giving and doing all these things for all of these people if you weren't just rolling in money and doing great and having a wonderful life? Like, that's the natural progression of the brain at that point. Right? That's how people are going to see it. And there's a lot of very, very bad education out there that frames things in this context of, like, just give and it'll work out and all this other stuff. And it's like, no, you give, you support, you build credibility, you do those things, but you have to let people know what it is that you need. You have to communicate the needs that you have and the things that you're trying to accomplish, just like when you're talking to these people and they're communicating it to you. So you can't just be the one to sit there and be like, hey, what's going on? You help them sort of solve whatever that particular problem is, and then, never let them know what it is that you're trying to do, right? You want to let them know what it is that you're trying to accomplish. You're not asking them for it. You're not saying, like, do this for me. You're just saying, this is what I'm trying to accomplish too. And some people will ask you about that and some people won't. That's the other thing. I think a lot of the time people sort of expect that if they're giving or sort of doing something, that the other person's going to ask them what they need. And yes, some people have that reciprocity impulse and they'll do it. There are a lot of people who won't. So you've got to let them know what it is that you could use help with, where it is that you could use support, and be clear about that particular dynamic.
Isn't it so interesting, Michael, that we say we don't judge a book by its cover, but we do, and we assume everyone's got their shit figured out, or we assume, hey, Michael's so well connected. I mean, he's good. He's got access to everyone. He's good. Therefore, me asking Michael is not even gonna it's not even gonna impact him, because, like, who am I to ask? And I'm just using that as an example, but I see this in a lot of entrepreneurial relationships where you read about a person, or you've heard of so-and-so, or you've met so-and-so, and just by the old stories you make up about that person tell you that, hey, like, they're all good. Like, trust me, I just read about you, or you're all good. I just saw you on Karan's podcast, and, like, you're good. And it's so far from the truth.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's the thing. Assumptions are very, very dangerous, right? They're very, very dangerous. And assumptions can ruin your life. Like if you are interested in connecting with somebody at a higher level than you, and you just assume that they have no needs, or you assume that they would never want to hear from you, or you assume that they're too busy, then all you're doing is basically joining the line of all the other people who made assumptions. And somebody else is going to walk right by that line. Somebody else has got the speed pass, right? And they're going to go right up to that person, and they're going to get the thing. They're going to build the relationship that you could have had because you made an assumption about that individual. You made an assumption about what you could offer. And that's another thing that is just so important. Like a lot of the time we sort of get into this place of like, well, what could I offer? What could I offer? You don't know. You don't know until you ask. Mm-hmm. Until you ask people what it is that they're working on, what it is that you could use help with, you have no idea where you could fit in to the equation. And I have had numerous instances where I'll meet people and think there's absolutely no way that they could need anything, and I'll even preface it with, well, it looks like you're doing really well, but, if there's anything right now that you're thinking about or that, you could use some help with, let me know. And they'll come back with the most random stuff. They'll come back with, my best friend's vegan and I don't know which restaurant to go to, next week. Or, you know what? We just bought this teacup poodle and I have no idea like how to, care for it. But my girlfriend really loves it and I don't want to kill it. So like, what do I do? Like these things will pop up and you just never know like what's going on in somebody's life, what it is that they could use help with, and all of those different types of things.
Yeah, just ask the question. Don't make assumptions. And I've got a question, Michael.
Yeah.
You get requests all the time. You get people reaching out to you saying, hey, Michael, can you connect me with so-and-so? Hey, Michael, can you do this? Hey, Michael, can you do that? Mm-hmm. What are the types of requests that you wish you never got? And really my question is like, what do people do poorly when they reach out to you and it makes you cringe? Like, oh, I wish this just never happened.
Yeah. I mean, I see this kind of the most on the LinkedIn where it's like, basically, I've referred to these people as like the barflies of the LinkedIn, right? Where it's like, they just kind of like sidle up and they're like, hey, you look like an interesting person and maybe we should connect. And then literally the next email or the next message is, I have a digital marketing agency, or I have this thing, or I have that thing. And, do you want to talk about your website, or do you want to talk about, XYZ, right? And the thing is, some of those people I might actually talk to if they took some time to do even the tiniest bit of research on me, like the tiniest, like something, read something of mine, say it like just refer to something, so that I don't feel like a number, right? And I think that's the thing. It's like, you have to be careful of seeing other people as your deus ex machina, right? So like in the theater world, there was this idea that if things were going really, really bad, a god would suddenly come down from the heavens and just be like, everything's cool, right? And a lot of the time what happens, especially in entrepreneurship, is that people then place the people that they read about or the people that they see an interview with as their deus ex machina. So they go in with asking blinders because they're expecting that person to just sort of solve all their problems, right? So the last thing you want is to have somebody email you or message you and say, hey, I saw your interview and it looks like you're really connected. Will you introduce me to Richard Branson? It's like, what? And that's the thing. It's like there's this thought that some of us are going to just like instantly solve a problem, usually because that's what the media has sort of created, right? So like most press and media is about one person making one introduction and then all of a sudden somebody's life completely changing. But that's the hockey stick, right? The hockey stick is what sells. People love the hockey stick, but behind the hockey stick is the step ladder. And that's all of the relationships that are behind the scenes in terms of that person getting to know people, understanding people, all of the introductions that happened before they met that high level person that basically helped them with whatever their project was or whatever the scenario was. All of those things are behind the scenes. So, it's do your research, right? Like even the tiniest bit, like 5 minutes worth of research and you will get more responses. I promise you. B, don't assume anybody wants your stuff. Like never assume that somebody wants your stuff. Have a conversation with them to understand if they might want your stuff, if it does make sense. See if they want to talk about it, right? But don't assume that somebody wants your stuff. And another thing, and I think this is a really bad one. Don't come to somebody with a gift or sort of a presentation of something that you're trying to sort of add value to them or support them or whatever, and finish the conversation with some like ridiculous ask. Right?
Like
so
what?
Don't go to
like
somebody
what?
and so don't go to somebody and be like, hey, I'd love to cover you in my on my newsletter and do this and that. And then you're like, yeah, that sounds great. Would love to do something. Thank you. I really appreciate that. And I'd love to see if you would be a client of mine in my in my program or project or whatever the scenario is. It's like it's just like the copywriting rule of like you choose one thing, right? Like it's one call to action. So if you're reaching out to somebody to help them or support them, keep it at that.
Mm-hmm.
Like keep it at that. If they ask you, what could you use help with or what could you use support with, let them know, but do not go for the jugular with an ask because you will look like a monster. And this is the thing. I see this too much. Where people, they've learned some script, and that's the other thing. Like, get rid of all the scripts and get rid of all the blueprints that everybody's given you because thousands of other people have been given those blueprints. They've been given those scripts. So, I don't want another message that says, I saw your profile and I thought it was fascinating and I just had to reach out to you because somebody wrote that. Say whatever it is that you need to say, right? Say whatever it is that you need to say. Say it in your words, because that's how you're going to connect with people. You're not going to connect with people by parroting whatever somebody else told you to say. Which leads me to, I'll throw this one out there. Don't start your conversation with, how can I help you? Seriously. Don't do it. If you start a conversation with how can I help you, you're assuming already that I need help.
Mm-hmm.
You're already assuming, and you're already making an assumption that you're the one to help me. And in addition to that, I don't know you yet. So do I know if I want help from you? If you're selling things on the black market, I don't want your help. Right? Like, I don't care how connected you are. I don't care how, if you are doing horrible things to humans, I don't want your help. So don't open with, how can I help you? Listen to people and you will learn how you can help them. That's the thing. Like, talk to people, listen to them. You will learn how you can help them. How can I help you is just like so raw. It's so like over the top, and everybody's used it and all of these different types of things. So come up with your own way to say it, but get to know somebody to understand, and only help if you genuinely want to help. If you open a conversation with, how can I help you? That means that you're telling everybody that you talk to, how can I help you? So you don't actually care about helping me. You just care about playing a game. And I'm not interested in games.
Yeah. What's fascinating, Michael, about what you just said is when we met up for coffee in New York, you literally had no cell phone near you, no laptop out. You had a notepad. And It was amazing on so many levels because you were taking notes. And in like 2020, what person takes notes in a conversation is not just typing or not just texting. And it made me feel also really valued, that you were hanging on to some things that I was saying of importance. Or when you asked me, I don't know what you asked me. I don't know if you said, where do you need the most help? I think you had your own question because you love asking really good questions as well. So you had your own amazing question, but I felt like you were truly listening.
Yeah.
I felt you were truly listening. You had zero intent to sell or pitch or any of that. And I walked away thinking, holy crap, Michael is such a cool dude.
Yeah. And that's the thing. It's like, if you just listen to people and you just have a conversation and you take the time to understand sort of who they are, then you're not going to, the relationships that you have are going to be very, very strong. Like, people are going to walk away with that same kind of feeling of like, that person was really cool and I'd love to introduce them to other people, or I really enjoy, my conversation with them. But you're also not going to feel the awkward sort of anxiety. Like, I weep for all the people out there who think that every conversation is a sales conversation, because they're losing out on some of the most important relationships in their life. And the thing is, yes, you got to sell, you got to make your money, you got to do what you got to do with your business and all those different types of things. But if you start every conversation thinking that every single person you're talking to is a prospect, you're going to have very, very shallow relationships. And some of them you're not going to have relationships at all. And there are so many other opportunities that are available to you when somebody is not just in that prospect category. If you're talking to them, yes, they may be a good fit for what you have to offer and what you do. And they will probably let you know if they have an interest or whatever, or be interested in referring you to people, but they also just could be a really, really great person to riff on a particular idea with, right? They could also be a person who could introduce you to a lot of different opportunities. They could be the person who listens to you when you're having the bad day, right? And you just you miss out on all of that if you treat everything like it's just another prospect conversation. And the same thing applies with digital. Like, if you are reaching out digitally and every reach out that you do is focused on converting, you're gonna basically, relationships are just gonna slip through, right? Because there are a lot of people, they don't want to talk about your product or your service. They don't want to talk business. They want to talk about all sorts of other things. They're interested in being humans. They're interested in being people. So it's really, really important, I think, to pay attention to that and to make sure that you have you can have your conversations that are your sales conversations. You got to do it for your business, but don't let every conversation just be a prospect conversation, because you're going to put way too much pressure on yourself and you're going to really damage the opportunity to have some really wonderful relationships.
Well said, my friend. Not everyone is a prospect, and I think too many people are being treated like prospects in every single interaction, especially, you referenced that LinkedIn comment. Every single LinkedIn message is the exact same. Hey, Michael, you have a fascinating profile. Thought I'd connect. Hey, Michael. Yeah. And you can reach out to Michael and say, hey, Michael, saw you on Karan's podcast. The part you said about spammy LinkedIn messages totally resonated with me. Would love to connect. Or Michael, saw you on Karan's podcast and then realized you also have a podcast. Awesome. Can't wait to check it out. Would love to connect. Go do that 5 minutes of research, please. You're going to stand out so quickly.
So quickly. And I can tell you, I've had people who they've listened to an episode and then they've emailed me and said, I really enjoyed this episode and this is why. And I've, connected with them. I've followed up with them. I've had some of them be guests on the show, right? It's one of those things. It's not that hard to take a little bit of extra time to learn just a little bit about whoever it is that you're reaching out to. And not a lot of people do it.
I love that, man. And Michael, the last thing I want to talk about, which I feel like it was the main thing I wanted to talk to you about today, has now become the last thing. But you said something really fascinating to me in January. When I asked you what you were working on, you said, hey, my thing is making relationships and brands referable. Mm-hmm. And I thought, what a fascinating concept. You think about marketing, or you think about being sticky, and you think about, hey, how can I grow my business or my brand? And what you said around creating referable brands I just found to be quite fascinating. And I know you had a workshop, at least at the time, on how to do that. Could you dive into what it takes to build a brand that's referable or relationships that are referable? I'd love to dive into that.
Yeah, sure. So basically, there are three main principles to focus on, and it's easy to remember because it spells the word AIM, and that is accessibility, influence, and memory. So I'll start with accessibility. Most of the time, what tends to happen is that we fall into what I like to refer to as the echo chamber of the enlightened, where everybody's kind of using the same words, doing the same things. So if you actually go outside of your industry, people don't quite understand what you're talking about, right? Whether it be the language that you use or just like the people you hang out with, whatever it is, right? So your first step in being more referable is making sure that you're accessible. Because if people feel like they don't understand, then they're probably not going to refer, right? They're probably not going to talk. And, it's the same thing when you think about accessibility. If you think about accessibility from a relationship standpoint, if people don't feel like they can introduce you to others, they're not going to introduce you to others, right? They've got to feel like this is somebody who I feel comfortable putting in front of my friends. So that's the first, like they've got to be in a place where it's like, I feel comfortable making an intro for you. And you want to think about how are you making yourself and your ideas accessible? How are you making it so that nobody feels stupid when you're explaining who you are and what you do? The second is influence. And most of the time when we think about the idea of influence, we think about it from the angle of persuasion, because there's been a ton of writing on it. There's been a ton of information on it. And we think about this concept of like, how do I persuade people to do something? But the fact of the matter is, real influence is when people are doing things of their own accord with your stuff. So if you want to create real influence, you have to create something or come up with something that other people will want to share because it makes them look better. Not because of how good it makes you look, but because of how good it makes them look. And the way that I often frame this is think about it as a magic trick. So if you were at a party and a magician showed you a magic trick, then said, here's exactly how I did the magic trick, and they showed you how to make the card disappear, how to make, pull the coin from the air, whatever it was, then what's the next thing you're going to do? You're going to go to another party and you're going to try to do that trick, right? And most of the time when we take our ideas, we don't think about how do I make this something that other people will share because it's going to make them look good. It's going to make them look known. It's going to make them look interesting. So if we're thinking about our relationships as well, it's like, what can we give these people in our interaction with them that would cause them to talk about us?
I love that.
Right? And be like, where did you learn that? Oh, I learned it from Mike. He taught me, this concept, right? Oh yeah. Somebody, you mentioned the relationship between giving and debt. Oh yeah, well, I learned that. Do you want an intro? It's a much easier type of thing. And then the final thing is memory. And the challenge that most of us have with memory is that a lot of the time we don't package our material so that it's easy for people to remember, right? Our brains can only process so much information. So if I told you here are the 32 points of creating a referable brand or being referable, this wouldn't work, right? But because I'm telling you it's accessibility, influence, and memory, and it's these three principles, it's going to be much, much easier for your audience to remember the idea of AIM and then share it with others, right? And talk about it. So I often like to say, it's not how well you tell the story. It's how easy it is for people to retell the story. And that's what you want to focus on. You want to focus on that dynamic of helping people have the tools to be able to retell the story. So you explain something in a metaphor, you put something together that it's just like, it's really, really easy for people to remember. Then they're going to talk about you when you're not there because they're going to remember that thing because it was easy to remember. And most of the time we don't take the time to do that. And the the main principles of this, I often like to say, if you want people to remember you more, focus on less. And that's LESS. That's language, emotion, simplicity, and structure. So if you start with language, most people never come up with their own words for things or their own ways of saying things. But if you do, you will be much, much easier to remember. So you change even the slightest placement of words in something, and people will remember you as the person who used that particular phrase, and it'll keep referring back to you. On the emotion side, our emotions are what help us solidify memory. So if I'm in a heightened emotional state, I'm going to remember a lot more of the things that are around me because that's my brain protecting me, right? That's how I survived in primitive times. I had to remember everything around me in heightened emotional states in order to not get eaten, the second time around, right? So if we're in a heightened emotional state, people will remember information more. So you want to think about, how are you infusing emotion into the conversations that you're having, into the stories that you're telling, into the things that you're presenting. And that leads me to simplicity, which is very, very simply the aspect of, over the years, for any number of instances, academics have always rewarded complexity. We were always rewarded for using the big words, for writing the big papers, for having like the complex idea. And what tends to happen is in business, the same thing pops up, right? Where people try to sort of impress us with their resumes and with all of their like fancy taglines and all their silly words and all their stuff. But really, the memory rewards simplicity. The easier it is for us to get, the easier it is we're going to pass it along and talk about it. So we need to simplify. And simplicity takes time, it takes effort, but you can boil things down to a point where people just like really, really get it. And then finally, structure. Our brains are wired to follow a logical structure. So I wouldn't read a book by starting in the middle and then going to one side or going to another. I have to start at the beginning and kind of move through the book. And our brains are processed in the very same way. So you always want to think about, what is the structure that you have packaged this thing in so it's easy for people to remember. For me, accessibility, influence, and memory spells AIM. That creates a structure, right? It's memorable because you think about the idea of taking aim, but it's a structure because you have to start with accessibility, then you can move on to influence, and then you can deal with memory. It wouldn't work if we went the opposite way. Because how do you make something memorable if you don't have something accessible? You're already in trouble, right? So you always want to think about, what is the structure that you create. And if you do that, if you think about language, emotion, simplicity, and structure, and you focus on that when you're crafting your message, you are significantly more likely to create something that is referable, that is interesting, that people are sort of going to go to. And if we look at it on the referable relationship side, the language that you use, people will remember and then talk to their friends about. If I have a deep conversation with you and we go into something that's emotional, and you experience an emotion while you're talking to me, you're going to remember that meeting even more. If what we covered was fairly simple, right? If I gave you very simple things to share or very simple things to talk about, you're going to remember it. And if there was a structure involved in the conversation and sort of the way that it happened, then you can go back and you can tell your friend the exact conversation. And in many cases, you've proved this, Karan, because basically we met back in January and you've covered points of things that we talked about and things that I did during that meeting. And it is July. So if you think about it from a memory standpoint, how many things did you remember?
Yeah, a ton.
From that language, emotion, simplicity, and structure process of that entire conversation.
Well said. I never put that together until now, but I remember that coffee like it was yesterday.
Yep.
And it was 7 months ago.
Yep. Pretty wild.
Wow. Powerful, man. Dude, I love that. I've got a final question on the AIM framework.
Yeah.
How do the accessibility, influence, and memory where do you see people, or which of those three categories, which one do most people often overlook? Like, don't worry, I've got that one handled.
I would say most people underestimate their level of accessibility. Like most people think that people get it in terms of what they do, and they are they are very, very far away from people actually getting it. And I've seen this numerous times where they really think that they know what they're doing for the client, or they know what it is that they're, the problem that they're solving, and we'll dig in, and it's like they're just off base, right? And a lot of the time, that's what's causing most of the problems. Like I've seen too many entrepreneurs who end up in a price war, basically just trying to undercut their price to sell enough to make the money that they need to make, because they started from a place where it's not clear enough to people what it is that they're actually doing. And if it's not clear enough, people are always going to question the price. If it's very, very clear, the problem that you're solving, the thing that you're doing for somebody, then it's very, very easy to command whatever price you want to command. But if people don't get it, they're ambiguity can basically decrease somebody's price by 50% or more easily. And I've had conversations like this where somebody is trying to, sell me, right? They're trying to get me to buy something. And I'm like, I don't understand what it is that you're actually gonna do. And when they name some ridiculous price on it, I'm like, why would I pay that? But if somebody can articulate very, very clearly, this is what we're going to do, this is the problem we're going to solve, or this is how this is going to be fixed, then yeah, tell me what the price is, and I'm going to consider it, because I'm going to believe it much, much more.
I love that, man. Michael, this has been an absolute pleasure. You are so easy to speak with, and you are just full of knowledge. And I mean, what better guest to have on the human to human podcast than the guy who's, all in on relationships. I've got 4 very quick rapid fire questions. The first is, I know you're a big books guy. Are there 1 or 2 books that you recommend for most business owners or entrepreneurs that often come up?
Yeah, I would say Essentialism by, I think it's got Greg McKeown. Really, if you want to just get better at making sure that you are, making decisions and not getting overwhelmed, that book will really help you just get better at saying no. It'll help you really get better at just sort of thinking through your particular process and the work that you're doing. And I'm trying to think of another one that I'm just like, yeah, I really found that one to be very, very useful. I mean, I'll go with Give and Take, because all of the studies in that book really can help you understand what is behind being a giver and sort of where the challenges are and where the structures are. And it'll help you really start to figure out your own place in that world, and how to be much more thoughtful about your giving and asking and all of those different types of things.
Amazing. That's the second time that book, Essentialism, has come up today.
Oh, wow.
Just today, just FYI.
Yeah.
What are you most excited about in the next 60 days?
Next 60 days. Wow. I'm kind of, it's interesting because I'm in the middle of this whole, quarantine sort of, craziness. So they've reopened the playgrounds here. So I've been able to take my daughter, to the playground. I'm really hoping within the next 60 days, some other kids stuff opens up, right? Like the opportunity to be able to take my daughter somewhere that is not just, the park, and, a playground in a, mass quarantine crazy, kind of situation, like going to the zoo or being able to go to a museum or something. That is fingers crossed that might be able to get into something like that.
Yeah, I think all of us are hoping for the best.
Yeah.
My final question is, tomorrow morning, the entire world wakes up, every city, every country, and for whatever reason, everybody is looking at the exact same billboard. But Michael gets to paint the message on that billboard for all of humanity to see. What would your billboard say?
Wow. No pressure, huh? I'm going back and forth between two.
Say them both, because I'd rather hear both.
Okay. So go where you're awesome, not where you're ordinary. And the keys to all the doors you need open are in other people's pockets. Those are the two.
That is powerful stuff. Where is the best place people can find you?
So my website is just smallpondenterprises.com, and folks can pop over there. I'm on the LinkedIn, so you can request me. Just like let me know you watch this and say something nice. I'm on the Book of Faces, but on the Book of Faces, I'm Mike Roderick because my Michael Roderick account got hacked. And yeah, just always feel free to reach out.
Got hacked because you were connected to everyone and somebody wanted.
But that was what happened. I was at the 5,000 friend limit that Facebook has, and some hacker saw that and said, "Oh, that's a great that's a great profile to just like decimate." And yeah, they took over my profile, changed my name, and started like adding people to all these like anti-Semitic groups and like doing like just all this like horrible stuff. So I had to get that profile closed down and then sort of shelve it, and then I had to start another one. But yeah, I'm Mike Roderick on there if you want to find the real me.
Dude, this has been incredible. I'm counting down the days until we have that coffee again. And just wanted to say, truly, man, thank you so much for being here and just sharing so openly. I really appreciate you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Karan. I really appreciate this. This was an absolute